Hello everyone, my name's Gary Wills and I'd like to introduce you to episode 29 on my YouTube channel. This episode is about the Battle of Castiglione, which I refought using a DBN scenario at Partizan in Newark in the UK in May of 2023 in support of my new book. Throwing Thunderbolts, a Wargamer's Guide to the War of the First Coalition, 1792 to 1797, is now available from Helion and Company via their website. So the Battle of Castiglione was fought on the 5th of August 1796 between Napoleon and his army of Italy and Wurmser the Austrian. And this is one of 10 scenarios that are included in my book. And during this campaign, Wurmser was making the first of 4 Austrian attempts to relieve the besieged fortress of Mantua. And Napoleon, using a strategy of the central position, needed to defeat all of the oncoming Austrian columns in order to continue the siege of Mantua. So the rules I used were these, the Bellis Napoleonicis, or DBN for short, which have been around a while, but the edition I was used was published only in 2020. And the attraction of these is that they work at army level, as you'll see as I describe the forces. So you do play the role of the very senior commanders in the battle. Essentially, there are 2 options for playing this game with DBN. You can either play it at full scale, and I include this smaller game in my book, where the ground scale is about 1 millimeter to 8 paces. The battlefield's about 3 foot by 2 foot. And the base of infantry is 2,000 to 2,500 infantry, or 1,000 to 1,250 cavalry, or 18 guns. And that gives about 29 bases plus commanders, and a figure scale of 1 to 320. And this is, if you're starting out, a really good place to start because it obviously reduces the number of figures you need to paint. However, because this game was going to be put on at Salute and at Partizan, I wanted it to be more of a spectacle, and so I used what I've called half scale. So 1 millimeter on the table was 4 paces, which gave a 6 by 4 foot battlefield, and a base of infantry was half, so 1,000 to 1,250. Cavalry 500 to 625, and 9 guns. This gave many more bases, so 52 plus the commanders, and a figure scale of 1's figure represents 160 men. So this is how I built the 2 armies. Each base was a unit with a base width of about 60 millimeters. I used 15 mil figures, my favourites, and the bases came in 4 different types. There were either what is called muskets in the rules, or line infantry, and they had 8 figures per base as a whole. The light infantry had 6 figures per base. Light cavalry had 4 figures per base. The artillery was represented by 1 gun on each base with 1 or 2 crew figures. So on average, at this scale, an infantry base represented 2 battalions, and you'll see in some of the photographs, certainly the close-ups that other people have taken, that each base has 2 4-figure bases, which are, where appropriate, painted up with different faces alike. So for the Austrians, these, as I said, were led by von Wurmser. He had 19,000 men and 60 guns on the battlefield, and I've represented these with 12 bases of muskets, 2 of light infantry, 3 of light cavalry, and 6 of foot artillery. Meanwhile, the French, led by General Division Napoleon Bonaparte, with 27,000 men and 40 guns. and these are represented by 13 bases of muskets, 7 bases of light infantry, 5 of light cavalry, and 3 foot artillery bases and 1 horse artillery base. Obviously, I had to do a bit of tinkering with the rules, as you might expect. The first point is the Austrian musket range in the army list for this period in the rules is restricted because of their lack of intrinsic light infantry in the musket bases. I've not done that in this game, mainly because there was a discrepancy in the number of battalion guns between the two armies. The French had very many fewer battalion guns than the Austrians, so I thought by keeping the two musket ranges the same would even that up somewhat. So the second area involved the victory conditions. Now, the basic victory conditions within DBN is that you win if you've destroyed a third of all the units in the game, including the commanders and the baggage train. And this comes to 10 for the Austrians and 8 for the French. However, the rules also point to a modification if you have a larger game, which adds 2 units to each victory condition. So I didn't like that because I felt that it led to more of an empty battlefield at the end of the game, because you need many more units. Obviously, the commanders are less likely to die, and the baggage trains are less likely to die. So all of the hits are going to be on the fighting units. So you end up with a big hole in the battlefield. So I didn't like that. And the other tweak I did was, strictly speaking, the Austrian victory condition should have been 11 units killed, but they only got that because I gave the French an extra commander in Fiorella, because they were on the other side of the battlefield. So I decided to ignore that and stick with 10 versus 8. So who were the commanders represented? Well, I chose these 3 guys. Von Wurmser was the army commander of the Austrians, and he was supported by his left wing commander, Sabotendorf. So the bigger formation on the battlefield is the Villages column, which I've chosen to be commanded by von Wurmser himself. Likewise, for the French, I've used Napoleon, obviously, as the army commander, and his left wing commander, Andre Messina, who has a big division in the game. And as I've already mentioned, Fiorella, who was commanding Serurier's troops coming up from the siege of Mantua, is also represented as a separate commander. So both sides get reinforcements, if you like. The Austrians have a detachment under Weidenfeld who only arrives towards the end of the battle, and using the DBN timescales, it turns out at turn 20. In none of my refights did he ever go on the field, so that probably needs revisiting, but nonetheless, that's when the scenario has him set up to come. The other thing I've done is, in reality, Napoleon waited until Fiorella got onto the battlefield before launching his major commands, and so strictly historically speaking, he should be on straight away. However, the Austrians are very outnumbered, so to improve the balance of the game as a wargame scenario, I allowed for there to be a delay in Fiorella's division deploying on the battlefield. So they had to throw a d6 at the end of the beginning of each turn, and if the score was less than or equal to the turn number, the division was assumed to be on the battlefield. Now, for those of you who've seen the salute video, will know that the French threw a 1 on the first turn, so it didn't change the history. But this does allow you to rebalance the scenario slightly. So just to reaffirm the victory conditions, the Austrians win if they destroy 10 French units or bases, while the French win if they destroy 8 Austrian units or bases, and this has to be done before the end of turn 24. So this is a map of the battle that you'll find in a number of places on the internet. In the research I did, it implies that the second line of the Austrian battle line was much stronger than it was in fact. So it's a bit odd, but you'll see the differences when you see my game deployed. And here is the game as I presented it at Partizan. I like to decorate the table with leaflets, even though these days people are reluctant to take them away. I prefer to take photographs of them, and obviously my past publications. You can see at the front the copy of Wellington at Bay, which is also a Helion publication. In the distance you can see an A3 roller banner that I use that gives key information about the scenario. So talking about the terrain a bit, the Austrians set up their line between this small elevation called the Monte Medellano, which was in fact was only about 5 meters above the surrounding countryside, on their left, all the way across to the tower, the Rocca di Solferino, in the hills on the right. The ground around which, at the very top of the ground, I defined as difficult terrain under the rules, but it's only a very small area on the battlefield. Everywhere else was good terrain. And just behind the tower is the village of Solferino itself, which would obviously become more famous later in the 19th century. It's interesting that we've always called it Castiglione after Napoleon's designation, but it was in fact a lot closer to Solferino. And this is the French line in a bit more close up, and I'm going to go through the deployment command by command. Here you can see Napoleon highlighted, a single figure on a 60 by 60 mil base, as defined by the rules. And in the centre was Algaraz's division, which you can see here, deployed. And on the right you can see Napoleon's initial strike force, which was provided by Quilmain's much smaller division. And on the left you can see Massena's much stronger division with a concentration of muskets and light infantry, together with some cavalry. So in the far distance behind the French lines you can see Despinoy's division of one base just entering the battlefield. Finally, on this side of the battlefield you can see the baggage train, which is an important part of DBN armies, and I represent these by artillery limbers because they have no other formal role in the game. And finally, on the other side of the battlefield we have Fiorella's division coming up from Mantua. Now let's turn our attention to the Austrians. On the Austrian left we have the Subottendorf's smaller command. And this is a mixed force of infantry and cavalry supporting the guns that are in the redoubt on the Monte Medellano. On the right we have Davidovic's much larger column. And here's a close-up of Davidovic's column, and it's anchored on another redoubt, the northern redoubt, and has light troops to the extreme right. The force is overall a combination of muskets with light cavalry and artillery. And you can see in the background the three units of infantry, which, as I mentioned earlier, form the extent of the second line of the Austrian command. See, Worms are highlighted as well. And this photograph also gives me the opportunity to talk about the most forward elements of the French army, the 4th Demi Brigade de Ligne, which was from Augereau's division, and was sent forward to make a false attack and pin the Austrians in place while Fiorella arrived on the battlefield. In the far distance, lurking on the edge of the battlefield, you can see Weidenfeld's reinforcement detachment waiting their turn to come on. Having zoomed in, this is a final view of the Austrian setup, where you can see how it all fits together. And this photograph shows the two armies facing off against each other, ready for action to begin. So let's get on with the game. So this shows the situation at the end of turn 1. And in DBN, the way the game works is the French take a turn and then the Austrians take a turn. But on each player turn, both sides get to shoot. So the artillery shoot in both turns normally. And it's important to remember that as you look through these photographs. And here on the French right, you can see that the Grenadiers of Quilmain's division attempting to advance on the Austrian redoubt have got the worst of an exchange with the Austrian cannon, receiving 2 hits, which results in them being shaken. A third hit will see them destroyed. So this is a very bad turn of events on the very first turn for the French. And on the French left, you can see that Massena has surged forward, closing the gap between himself and the 4th line in preparation for their own attack. In the background, you can see here that the 2nd Austrian line has formed column ready to move to confront Fiorella's men. And we're now moving on to the end of turn 2, which you can see in overview here. And the key thing happening here is it involves cavalry on the French right. The Austrian cavalry have ridden out to engage their French numbers, defeated them and sent them back. And this is a close-up of the cavalry fight. But the other thing it highlights is that the other French light cavalry unit from the French right has been targeted by the Austrian artillery in the redoubt and was destroyed. On the French left, the Austrian artillery was again effective and destroyed one of the bases of the 4th Demi Brigade de Ligne, although Massena was unable to bring his men further forward. And this photograph shows the situation at the end of turn 3. And we'll start by looking at the situation on the French right, Austrian left. And you can see from the overview that things have changed. And you can see here in detail that the 2 French cavalry units both been destroyed by their Austrian opposite numbers. And the Grenadier unit has received its 3rd and final hit and has also been destroyed. So Napoleon is standing there looking on as Quilmain's division is reduced down to just the horse artillery of Marmont. And on the left, we can see Massena's division crawling forward. And in this close-up, you can see Massena's division with the survivors of the 4th Demi Brigade de Ligne confronting the now advanced Austrian light troops on the hill. And if you look at the centre of the Austrian battle line, it's now looking quite formidable against Augral's weakened division. Meanwhile, Fiorella's division has advanced to perhaps help and is faced off by the redeployed Austrian second line. And here's a close-up of Fiorella's division deployed in a column with the light infantry leading, followed by their artillery. So we're now going to take the opportunity to look at the Austrian line at the end of turn 3 in a bit more detail, starting with the troops on their extreme right wing. And in this close-up you can see the Austrian line on the extreme right. The grey figures are the Jaegers with their air rifles, or Windenbusch, supported by battalions of Grenzers, and finished off by a normal musket base. You can't really see it on this picture, but the Austrian figures have been converted, because at this time the Austrian artillery figures have been converted, because at this time they wore a sort of version of the Corsa Hut rather than the normal Bicorn they wore later on. And moving on now to Davidovich's column in the centre, and these are muskets mainly, supported by some light cavalry from the single regiment of Uhlans in the Austrian army at this time, and a couple of units of field artillery. And on the Austrian left, let's have a look at Sir Bottendorf's troops a bit closer. And you can see his artillery firmly ensconced in their redoubts, supported by their victorious light cavalry, with more of the same Uhlan regiment, and muskets in the far distance, including the one Hungarian regiment with the army. And now let's look at the redeployed second line. And these are 3 musket units comprising approximately 6 battalions of infantry. So we'll finish the turn by looking at the scoreboard at the end of turn 3, and as you might have anticipated already, the score is 5-0 to the Austrians. So we're now moving into turn 5, and this is the overview of the battlefield. And you can see on the left, the French left, Massena's driving to get engaged with the Davidovich's troops. At the same time, Fiorello was redeployed his men to confront the Austrian rearguard. And on the Austrian left, Sir Bottendorf's cavalry have decided they can probably finish off Kilmain's division altogether by attacking the horse artillery. And you can see this cavalry charge from the Austrian perspective here. So at the end of turn 5, the score's unchanged. The Austrians have 5 victory points and the French have none. And we're now proceeded to the end of game turn 6, and this is the photograph showing the overview of the action. And we'll start by taking a look at what's left of Kilmain's division. And as we can see, Marmont's horse artillery holding on to demonstrate that it's never a good idea to charge horse artillery from the front, one of the 2 cavalry units having already been destroyed. And now we'll move on to Massena's division on the other flank. And here in detail you can see that Massena desperately trying to close on the Austrian line and has received some punishment in return. Likewise, at the bottom of the picture you can see that the remnants of the 4th Demi-Brigade de Ligne have been destroyed by the Austrian fire. Meanwhile, Fiorella is continuing to advance on the Austrian rearguard. And this is a nice shot of Fiorella's advance. You can see the figures more clearly. The French figures are all minifigs, apart from the general, who's a chariot miniature, and the Austrians are all from the excellent chariot miniatures range. So the score at the end of turn 6 has not got any better for the French. It's now 6 points to Austria and only 1 to the French. Okay, so we now move on to the end of game turn 7, and this is the overview from the French point of view. Now let's just focus on Massina's division initially. While they caused the defeat of 2 Austrian musket bases, they also lost the 2 bases of Rome, artillery and cavalry. Looking now at Algarau's division in the centre, and although Algarau was successful in destroying 2 Austrian units, including artillery, they also lost a foot base of their own. And on the French right, Marmont's horse artillery claimed the other Austrian cavalry unit to add to the previous one. So this view of the table from the Austrian perspective allows us to focus on the Austrian rearguard. And we can see here that Fiorello had continued to close with the Austrian rearguard, but one of his bases was destroyed by the Austrian infantry's musket fire and their supporting battalion guns. So at the end of game turn 7, we ended up with the final score, with Austria having inflicted 10 losses on the French to a reply of only 6 in return. So a very bloody last turn as the 2 sides' main bodies got to grips. And this fulfilled the Austrian victory conditions of 10 or more French units destroyed. So they get the win. So this shot I've included because it shows my son James, who attends all of these shows with me. He's not really a Napoleonic wargamer, but and DVN didn't turn out to be his favourite set of rules, but nonetheless he always turns up and is my right-hand man in all these demonstrations. So thank you, James. So at this point I want to give some brief conclusions on the game. I felt the rules, which I'm not an expert at using, did give a quick game, and overall they worked well, providing you understand what you're dealing with, which is it's a division or army level game, not a battalion level game. The artillery is quite powerful in the game. It fires twice per turn, and as you've seen in this playthrough, was very effective with some good dice throwing. So consequently, when you are attacking, as the French were in this case, it's very important to suppress the or distract the enemy artillery with your own guns, and the French were not effective at doing that in this occasion. Another observation I'd make is that rallying off of hits is perhaps a missing element in the game. You can rally off hits, but in a rather strange way, by a shaken unit winning a period of close combat, which is obviously not likely because the odds are stacked against them. So I don't know whether that fits in with the scale of the game or not, but it's certainly something I want to look at. Obviously it would slow the game down, which is maybe why it's not included in the first place. In the final section of the video, I wanted to include some photographs that are in the videos and blogs pages of the various kind contributors who roam the sites, taking photographs and videos so that we can all get to see them. It's an important role for me because as a host of games, sometimes it's only when I get home and look at these videos that I get a proper look at some of the games that were on show, as I'm so busy running backwards and forwards between the T-bar and my own table. So here we start with Henry Hyde. So thank you for watching the video, and I hope the acknowledged photographers from the previous slides feel their work's been used appropriately. And on this slide you can see all of my publications so far. The Wellington and Bay was the first book I published with Helion, and there are other publications with Helion with my work in. Obviously, it'd be great if you could buy my latest book, Throwing Thunderbolts from Helion. It's been a lot of work, and I think it's a unique guide to wargaming the War of the First Coalition, of which the Castiglione scenario you've just seen is only one of 10. And finally, of course, if you've liked this video, there are loads more on my YouTube channel, including a playlist specifically for Throwing Thunderbolts. And please consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you, and goodbye.